The Sound of Dao podcast is also available to listen to on iTunes, Spotify, and Audible. So if you prefer to listen to your podcast, then you can go head on over there, search up The Sound of Dao on those platforms, and go give it a listen. If not, if you prefer to watch your podcast, then this is the right place. You are in the right place. Welcome to YouTube, folks. What's up?
From my school, the only thing that stopped our shooter was an armed police officer that was on campus.
Recorded from West Palm Beach, Florida, you are listening to The Sound of Dao with your host, Vince Dao.
Okay, folks, what's going on? I'm out here in beautiful West Palm Beach, Florida, and today on the podcast, we have a very special guest and a very wonderful interview because I'm out here, I gotta talk to people. So here's a quick introduction to today's guest. You guys are gonna really like this. So if you were following politics back in 2018, surely you remember March for Our Lives. Following the Parkland shooting, which was a tragedy in which most of the nation still knows about and still remembers, a group of left-wing student activists called March for Our Lives, led by people like David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez, started to create a mass campaign for gun control. And they were immediately praised and paraded around by the mainstream media. And at the same time, the mainstream media was simultaneously doing plenty to help their agenda, constantly giving coverage to mass shooting after mass shooting, and then giving these activists a platform in order to speak and try to campaign for the Democratic Party for the midterm elections that year. And yet, despite the constant coverage of school shootings and mass shootings in general that year, one such mass shooting that is of significant size, we're not talking about a small scale event here, is swept completely under the rug and often forgotten about by most people. Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about the Santa Fe school shooting in Texas. Despite constant non-stop media coverage of mass shootings that year, this shooting, in which 10 people tragically died. So we're not talking about a tiny mass shooting here. This was the second biggest school shooting behind Parkland that year. Barely got any media coverage or any discussion around it in the days following this shooting. And the question is, why? Well, there's a simple answer.
That's right. A good guy with a gun stopped a bad guy with a gun.
Because the Santa Fe school shooting did not fit the narrative of the mainstream media. Following the shooting, March for Our Lives activists attempted to take advantage of the situation by holding a mass pro-gun control rally in Santa Fe, Texas. But instead of being embraced with open arms as they expected, the students in the community of Santa Fe overwhelmingly rejected and pushed out the March for Our Lives activists.
We immediately made it very clear that they could take all of their protests to Houston, but they were not coming to Santa Fe.
Despite mainstream media caricatures about what young people and survivors of school shootings were supposed to look like, this community asserted that they still remained strong supporters of the Second Amendment, and the media was not happy about that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, considering all of the coverage that the media has given to activists like David Hogg, and considering the fact that, as you guys know, and as I've talked about, March for Our Lives has a special place in my heart because it's what got me into politics, today on The Sound of Dao, we have a very special guest.
On May 18th, 2018, I lost my favorite substitute teacher to an armed shooter.
Meet Leila Butler. Leila attended Santa Fe. She was there at school and experienced the shooting on the day that it happened. And yet, despite all of that, she's a conservative activist who is a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. Considering that it's only fair that opposing voices are given a platform, today on the podcast, we had a great discussion about gun control, what happened that day, what it was like, and just overall her political experiences and beliefs. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the anti-David Hogg. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Leila Butler. Okay, folks, and welcome back to The Sound of Dao. Today, I am here with a very special guest, Leila Butler. How are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
I mean, your voice is a little bit COVID-y.
It's been a long week.
I think you're infecting me probably as we speak. But
taking the risk.
All right, anyways. So, Leila, I think you have a very interesting story because March for Our Lives is actually the very reason why I got into politics, like doing this, because I was like, there was one positive aspect of it, which it showed, hey, young people can get involved just for the completely wrong reason, right? But I remember they sort of created this objective truth that if you've been through a school shooting, then that's why you support gun control. And we were there, we saw it, and so you have no opinion because you weren't there. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that?
I completely think that's the exact mindset that a lot of those people have, is that because the former like most of the places that school shooting happens are in very liberal counties. And so most of the students who are in those counties lean very liberal. And so if that's the only point of view that you're seeing, oftentimes that's the only thing that gets spread. And so a lot of people just think that's what every single high school student who's been through a shooting believes.
And so what was it like? Were you at school that day?
I was at school that day.
What was it like that day?
So I was actually on the other side of the building. Praise the Lord. So it happened in the fine arts wing. I was actually like literally on the complete opposite side of the building. So for me, I was just sitting in class, the fire alarm went off, and it was really weird because most of the time our school would let us know when we had fire drills. So, my teacher had no idea. We all just evacuated the building. We started going outside, and we had seen a lot of panicked faces on most of the teachers. They were really confused. Like, we were really confused because it wasn't like a normal reaction, and pretty quickly we realized that like something wasn't right because normally, with fire drills, you stand outside in the grass until you hear over the PA like, oh, you can come back in. But we were getting told like, run across the highway, like get as far as you can from the building. Like if you could tell that something was wrong. And like, so for me, I didn't even hear gunshots. Like that's how far away I was. Or maybe it was the time that I got outside, but like I got probably the least out of it possible, which is like I said, praise the Lord, like, because I could have been so much closer. But I know for a lot of people who were a lot closer, they were going out the back side of the building towards where he actually was. And, you're getting questioned by police and you're dumping out your backpack and, like, you're having to take everything with you because they don't know who's doing what. So.
It must be absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But, you lived through it. I'm glad you did. David Hogg, interestingly, I don't believe he was even at school that day.
That's definitely a topic of debate from what I understand.
But he's become this main advocate, and he probably uses more fallacies than anyone I've ever seen support gun control. He creates this objective truth. We were there, you have no opinion.
And
you
fallacies
were there.
Trick people. That's the thing, is that people can't see through them most of the time.
You were there, and when this how happened, did you magically become a blue-haired gun control supporter?
Absolutely not. It's kind of that thing, it's where you have to figure out what you were raised to believe and what you believe and how all of that plays into what happens in your life. Because was I raised in a conservative town as a Christian kid in a Christian family, believing that guns are good? Yes. But you don't always have to take what you were raised to believe and believe that. Did I do that? Yes. But also in the same breath, it's like you have to take what you believe and figure out, like, with the real world experiences, if that is still applicable. And a lot of people don't do that. So
I remember hearing this story that basically March for Our Lives tried to weave their little weaselly asses into your town.
Yes,
and
they
you
did.
just ran them out of Texas.
Yes. We told them, we were like, you can take it to Houston because Houston's, the closest major city. And, major cities are most of the time very blue.
Yeah.
So we told them, take it to Houston, but you're not coming here. Like, you're not.
So how did that go? Like,
they're not going to get the warm welcome that they wanted.
So they tried to do a march in your town or what? Yeah.
Yeah, they did. But they obviously didn't end up doing it because they knew that they were going to get probably like 4 supporters, if I had to guess, and it's the incoming freshmen that have been brainwashed into thinking that, whatever they're seeing on social media.
So what do you say to the people who say that the solution to all these problems is gun control? And, we've already established that their whole you don't care about the kids thing is just nonsense. But then on an argument, so once we get that out of the way,
right.
And I think that's why it's great that, you're here and you're political activists, because they try to play these games, right? They try to say, well, look at David Hogg. He's a school shooting victim that wasn't there that day, but that doesn't matter. He has, that's why his opinion matters the most. So once we get that out of the way, what do you say to those people?
So for me, I can't speak on other schools because, I don't have the same knowledge that I do in other schools. But from my school, the only thing that stopped our shooter was an armed police officer that was on campus. So we have we have a division of the city police that is specifically at the high school. And so they're armed, and they bravely ran into the direction of fire while everyone was running away, and they were able to get him down. So the simple fact that a good gun stopped a bad gun, like that's it. Like you could go into more, but that's the only reason that if those police officers hadn't been there to get him down, who knows how far into the building he got, how many more people he could have injured, killed, like death toll would have been so much higher just for the sole fact of someone hadn't ran in that same direction.
Well, I think that's what's so ironic about this is that March for Our Lives is also against school police.
Really?
I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, so David Hogg, all of them, they were saying, because they were talking about putting more cops in schools, and
Right.
there's like, no, because you got to remember, it's all about intersectionality.
Right.
So it's not just March for Our Lives, there's also Black Lives Matter involved,
Right.
and they're intertwined, and there was this debate in my school district. I mean, I live in a communist school district, but there was this debate where they were going to abolish the school police. And I remember I was at this, it was a pro school police rally, but they were counter protesters. I go up to talk to them. I'm like, I looked at this kid, and he's a guy, and he dyed his hair pink. So I was like, I know you March for Life too.
Right.
It's safe to say, okay.
Not a big leap.
But then I asked him, I was like, you were there 2 years ago. Right. We had walkouts all across the district. Do you not remember that?
Right.
I was like, are you dumb? Like you out here saying
early onset dementia.
Keep us safe from school
Right.
shootings, but take the school police out of schools. I was like, idiot. Who do you think is going to stop if that happens?
When you take police out, you know who becomes the front line? The teachers. And you know who's not trained to stop literal people who are coming in to kill? Teachers. Their job is to educate, not to try and save lives. Like, that's adding on so much to their job that they don't need to be worrying about. Like,
I mean, that's what they exploit the issue, whatever it is. So 2018, there was a midterm election.
Right.
So you had to exploit the dead kids. Then,
and it was a big year for that, so they really took it and ran with it, honestly.
2020, you exploit the black people, kill black cops. It doesn't even matter to them if it's logically consistent, what they're saying. Like,
it's what's right now.
Stop school shootings, but abolish the school police.
In my school district now, I've graduated since then. I was graduated 2020, but in these past couple of months, my school district actually made it to where teachers on campus can actually carry. So it's one of those programs where, students don't know who's carrying and who's not carrying. Teachers have to go through extensive training. They have to already have had their CHL, if I'm not mistaken. Like, it's a very well thought out process. Had it happened a little earlier, could we have avoided this? Yes, but better late than never, But obviously we're taking steps where they've realized, okay, maybe guns aren't bad. We were never really in a position in my school district where we thought guns were the problem because, that's just not really the town that I live in. But my school district has now taken the steps to make sure that we have more than just these amazing police officers, that everyone has the opportunity to make sure that they can save a life if that's what they choose to do.
Well, I think, the problem is that people, and I was talking about this on another podcast that you guys will find out later, but the problem is that people, they look for the convenient answers to things, and they also like the idea that the government can solve everything, which they can't. So they think it's much more convenient for them to say, well, if the government just gets rid of guns, they'll stop the shootings. It's much harder to say, which is the pro-gun stance, which is that this is still going to happen.
Right.
And people don't want to hear that. But it's still going to happen. Now, how can we minimize it?
See, the thing is with at my school, our shooter, he was, I believe, 17. And he had not legally purchased those firearms. He had stolen them from his dad. So they weren't legally obtained. So by outlawing this, who else? You could just go steal them from someone. Like, these criminals have a way of getting around and to do whatever they want. Like, it's not, laws don't solve every single issue. There's got to be some logic behind it. But.
So how was the experience after that? Because I think it's pretty interesting. So
what aspect do you want to talk about?
So well, we'll just go in steps. So, like, when you, I guess, came back to school.
So we actually didn't go back that school year.
Wow.
It was late May. So the school year was over in about 2.5 weeks. So we ended up actually not going back. But by the time we had gone back in the next fall, our school had equipped. We had panic buttons in every room that would alert the police and all of emergency services. We had metal detectors. We had a lot more on-campus staff that were doing searches, that kind of thing. Like when you go through the metal detector, they search your bag if you go off, that kind of thing. Especially one thing that all of our doors now, in the school, if you open one and you don't how teachers can swipe out. If you don't swipe out, if you open a door, an obnoxious alarm goes off and the camera starts recording so they can see who's coming in and out. So they've taken a lot of safety precautions to try and make sure something like this doesn't happen again, because they know, we live in a great city, but you never know. There's not always great people.
And then what made you, I don't know if you were politically involved before, but is that what made you want to get into it, or
I got mostly involved in the 2016 election, but I would definitely say this pushed me off a lot because I knew what I stood for.
You saw a March for Our Lives, basically.
I knew what I stood for,
yeah.
And I knew what I believed before then, but I had gotten so frustrated with just. It had literally washed over every single viewpoint of anyone who didn't believe what March for Our Lives had believed. And I was tired of seeing it because Honestly, I think that most people don't know about the Santa Fe High School shooting because of our gun beliefs. You know,
And it was the second biggest shooting of the year.
exactly
Eight
like,
kids, right?
10,
10?
8 kids. So it was 10 total, 8 kids, 2 teachers, and then
yeah.
13 injured. But most people have never even heard of it because when media
Because it
found
wasn't
out,
politically convenient.
it wasn't politically
yeah.
convenient. They couldn't use us to push this agenda, and so they said, okay, well then why not? We just won't talk about it then. And that's disgusting. You know, you can't just glaze over these things because you don't agree with whatever these people believe in. It's still a traumatic experience no matter what, and these are things that we need to shine light on.
What did you think of the media reaction? What was the media reaction to it? Because I remember it came, it was like a news for a day and it just disappeared.
So they had come for a couple days, and they had just lined up, and they were just on the other side of the highway just as much as they could. And then after that, once they had like realized they just stopped coming, you know. Some major news outlets had reached out to me like on the day of, you know, to get interviews, like kind of like the day as it was happening, so they could keep that step by step. But after that, there was really never anything, you know. I definitely tried to look into like seeing, because I knew that March for Our Lives those students had gotten such an opportunity to like speak about their beliefs and, you know, share their point of view and their experiences. And it wasn't that I didn't want the light. I just wanted to be able to like give myself and my fellow peers the opportunity to say like, listen, not every teenager believes this, but nobody was given the opportunity because it wasn't a political agenda that was wanting to be pushed.
No, the media is disgusting, you know, and
sure.
for them to pretend like
It just didn't happen.
I remember this journalist from CNN got mad that a journalist from the New York Times was called by some conservative to be just working for the Democratic Party, and they tried to, how dare you call our free press those types of names? That is an esteemed journalist. How dare you? No, you're straight up doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, they're straight up doing it because if they were objective, they would realize like this was a huge mass shooting. You know, and I saw mass shootings, I think, were smaller that year, get more coverage than the damn Santa Fe shooting. No one even remembers the Santa Fe shooting.
Exactly.
You know?
And it's not necessarily like, for me, it's not necessarily like, oh, you know, no one knows about the shooting. Like, no one knows what I went through. It's the fact that regardless of our beliefs, these lives should be remembered and these lives should be known, but no one does. And that's hard, especially for the families who did lose lives.
Yeah.
It's disgusting to see that no one knows about this just because we don't believe that guns are bad.
What's it been like I know you sort of made a name for yourself off of that, right? How is it? A little bit. You were in a little NRA mini documentary,
NRA
right?
interview.
But ultimately, do you ever want to get involved in politically? You know, like.
So I'm actually a government major, so that's long term. That's definitely the goal. You know, I'd love to be involved somewhat in the political sphere in the United States government, but it's just based on the opportunities I get. But I think with the experiences that I have in my life, like, you know, the shooting and then just everything else that has made me me, I feel like that's what I want to do. Is I want to be able to go into government and make a difference for good, because most of the young people that you see in government are very liberal, and they're brainwashing all of these children who have no idea what they're just seeing what they see on Twitter, and they say, okay, well, AOC said it. It must be fact. And so I think that's something that I definitely want to get into, because I'm so passionate about the experiences that I've had, and I want to just take them and I want to make a change for the better, or at least what I believe is the better.
It is the better. Don't worry. It's subjective truth. No, yeah, I think that's really important, because someone needs to stand up for, like, us, like conservative kids, and they just completely push our stories under the rug, you know. And it's really sad, because they're alienating such a large population of this country.
It really is.
It's funny because they say they hate Trump so much, right? But if they really cared about stopping people, like, you have to understand why Trump won,
right?
Like, why Trump is there. Okay, Trump is there, and the reason why Trump is there, not just random establishment Republican, okay, is because they've been alienating this whole population, whether they're a bunch of racists, they're a bunch of rednecks, they're hillbillies, or they just
whatever
don't exist.
Name you want to call
they
them.
don't exist. They're just not there.
Right.
And the more you try to push us under the rug, the more you say, well, this school shooting matters, but this one doesn't.
Right.
The more, you know.
It really fuels the fire.
It really does fuel a fire. What would you like to say to March for Our Lives, if you could have them directly? I mean,
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think I would say I don't know exact words, but I would definitely say something along the lines of, you know, feel free to say whatever you want and fight for your rights. You know, I am a firm believer of you don't have to agree with me, just know what you want and know what you stand for and fight for that. So I think fight for what you want, but don't act like you're the only opinion and that what you believe is the only whole heart truth, because oftentimes we're not right. You know, we're human, we make mistakes, we have like fallacies and we have gaps in logic. So I would just say fight for what you believe, but don't brainwash people into thinking that that's the only path of thought, because it's not.
So you're at Liberty now, right?
Liberty University.
You're kind of lucky in a way, because you never had to deal with like what I have to deal with.
No,
Yeah. So I think it's almost a trip to me to almost like even see that something like Liberty exists.
Oh my gosh.
You know, because
it's a little piece of heaven on earth. Hear that?
Because I've always grown up in this world where like I've always been the minority,
right?
You know, and well, not always, because I used to be a liberal, but
right.
like,
well, thank the Lord you're not. We'll say that.
But I feel like when more of us need to actually come together and form majorities, you know, because it's like that's the biggest problem I see with organizing. You know, like even with the school shooting thing, there was a thing called March for Our Rights. I don't know if you knew that.
I don't think I heard of that one.
Okay, yeah. So there's a thing called March for Our Lives, March for Our Rights.
Right.
And it was in no shortage of Second Amendment defenders.
Right.
It just never took off because we just don't organize the same way the left
right.
does. You know, we if we wanted to, like you saw what we did in the Virginia Capitol earlier this year.
Oh yeah, I remember
and,
that.
You know, Michigan during the lock, like we can do it.
Right.
But we just for too long, I feel like, haven't had the energy or the motivation or just the ability to organize that way. Like remember,
people are just
March
too
for Our
comfortable.
Lives was one of the biggest protests in
Oh my
American
gosh.
history. We could do that.
Right.
I mean, there are how many guns in this country? I think there's more guns than people in this country,
Oh,
or
by
close
far.
to that, right?
I believe that.
And so, all we have to do is really just stand up for ourselves, you know. But but not just do it by ourselves, because it's like I was always, I'm out here counter protest. No,
Right.
we need to get together and actually do that,
Right.
you know. And I think we can make a real change, because the arguments for gun control make no sense.
Right.
Okay, they're logically inconsistent. That's actually that was the one thing that like turned me into conservative. Because I heard both sides because I had an open mind, and I was like, this makes no sense. The arguments for gun control make no sense.
Right.
It's based off the idea.
It goes back and forth.
It's
whatever's convenient at the time.
All it
typically.
is, it's simply based off the idea that you can, if you remove bad stuff from society, it removes bad people, which it just doesn't. It just doesn't. You know, that's it. So I found this page on Instagram called March for Our Rights, and it was an actual organization.
Really.
But it's got like 8,000 followers. They had
Not
a little
nearly the following.
mini table at downtown LA once. And I was like, come on, dude. Like there are so many people that could do this.
Right.
We just need to stand up and actually say it, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, anyways, Leila, thank you for coming on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It was a lot of fun. I think you have a really interesting story. And I think, you know, you should tell it more often, because it'll really get some people thinking, because there's a lot of people who genuinely think, you know, the school shootings, it's an objective issue about gun
Right.
control, which is not, you know, and a lot of us are not in a position to stand up and say, no, what the hell?
Right.
But, you know, you are. So I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.